Welcome back to another episode of Thinking That Matters. I'm Elizabeth Mahusay, your podcast host, and I have the privilege of interviewing and having a conversation today with Crispin Thompson. And I am so excited for you all to hear from him and to glean from not only his experience, but the wisdom that he brings to what we're going to talk about today, which is centered around leadership. So without further ado, Crispin, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, so that we can dive in.
Certainly. Super excited to be here. Maybe a little humbled by the word wisdom there in the introduction. I can certainly talk about experience. The listeners can decide if there's any wisdom to be had from that. You know, my background, I spent about 30 years in tech. I was with Hewlett Packard, later Hewlett Packard Enterprise, for a very long time. And the way I always say it is I grew up there professionally and personally, because I started when I was 20 and I did 25 years there. And, kind of grew myself, became a leader, became an executive, did a few executive roles at some other places. But one thing that really stuck with me when I achieved a certain level there at HP was that I really wanted to help other leaders become real leaders, or see managers really reach their potential and become leaders. And so here in this last year, I founded the Leadership Studio, which is my company. And we're really focused on how do we make leaders find their potential, build to their potential, accept their potential, and really lead authentically. So yeah, happy to have a great conversation today. Happy to talk about all the things that kind of led me here. And one thing that I very proudly admit is that everything that we do at the Leadership Studio, all of the lessons, all the practical tools that we use and exercises, everything can be rooted back into some failure I had in my career. So it's basically, it's largely just be better than I was. And isn't that great? So.
Right. I love that. Okay, so something that you said caught my attention. Well, okay, several things you said caught my attention. But first, I want you to put on your way back, since you grew up in tech. Name one leader, that the first leader that comes to your mind that helped you find who you were as a leader.
Well, so it's interesting because I've been blessed. I've been blessed to have had a lot of really invested mentors in my
Okay.
life, and people that were willing. And I won't I won't name one name, and I will name another name. We'll do that way.
Okay.
So
Got
very
it.
very early in my career, I was very successful for my age. I came in young, and I was very successful, and it was the mid to late 90s in tech. Everything was growing at just an unimaginable rate. So a lot of people got promoted, perhaps promoted ahead of when they were ready. And I think I came in with ego that was undeserved, and I think that was being reflected outward.
Mm.
Arrogance, perhaps. And eventually I had someone just get in my ear and say, listen, it doesn't matter if you're the youngest in the room. You should listen to the people that have been here for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, because they know how to mature themselves, how to grow their career. And I'm sure at that point I was still thinking job, right? But that person was very blunt in my ear. And I think they had to be, because I think that shell of, and unfortunately arrogance is the right word, but that shell of arrogance was not going to be broken through. It was just deflecting anything else that anyone might have said. That doesn't apply. I'm better than that, whatever.
I'm
So
better
that
than that.
person,
Yeah.
that person broke through. But you asked for a name. And I would say shortly after I became an executive at HP, I worked for a gentleman named Lance St. Clair. And Lance had, storied career at a lot of places, at Frito, at Dell, at
Okay.
HP, and really did some amazing things. And he had a real interesting South Texas way about him that was an interesting culture shock, I think, for HP, which was, much more we should reach consensus, and he was more we're going to get it done, we're going to get it done now. And he brought a couple of concepts in my head of what's the story we're trying to tell here. And that was an interesting concept for me, because having been in these quote unquote strategy and planning roles for a lot of my career, I was no stranger to building PowerPoint decks, right? So the story for me
Right.
is what's on the slide, but he helped me see that the story was, how do you get the answer you need from the audience you're talking to? How do you change in the moment? How do you react? How do you deflect? And so I would love to say that a lot of my maturing as an executive was from those very blunt words from Lance in my ear. And I mean blunt. Sometimes I do something and he'd say, Chris, that was terrible. Or I remember one time where I made what I knew in my head was a really great analogy in a room that fell dead on everything. And as we left the room, he said, "Don't ever do that ever again." And like that was, I don't know, 15 years ago, and I still feel it in my heart. Those words that he said to
Like,
me.
oh,
So
oh.
yeah, so Lance was really influential to me at that point in my life and my career.
So one of the things that I hear from what you're saying is part of the mark of being a good leader is being willing to say the things that people need to hear, not necessarily what they want to hear, and it being done out of a sense. Because what I picked up from when you were describing Lance is you, there's this sense that you knew he wanted to help you.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Even with his approach, which was equal parts kind of bluntness and sarcastic humor, it was always meant to make all of us more successful. There was never any malice involved. And I would like to make one caveat to what you said. So I don't think it's we need to say what they need to say, what they need to hear, but we need to say it how they need to hear it. And I think
Mm,
the how is really how differentiated leaders stand out. When we talk about someone that has executive presence is a very difficult term to define, except when it's not there. You can say, oh, they lack this or they lack that. But when all of those kind of intangibles come together, they stand out. That's the person you want to see up on the stage in front of the big room. It's the person that even with the challenging message, is still going to keep that team together behind them, ready to make that next leap.
yes, that's actually a great distinction that there is a need. The how is incredibly important, which speaks to the value of refined communication. And I know you had mentioned in our conversation before we started recording that in terms of what you do with and for leaders, communication is a part of that. So speak to that. What have you found is maybe one of the larger areas of struggle for leaders in this aspect of communication? And in what ways are you helping leaders to develop better communication?
Yeah, for sure. I think you cannot be a great leader if you cannot also be at least a very good communicator. Maybe you don't have to be a great communicator. I think George W. Bush is maybe a good example of that. I think a lot of great things he did as a leader, but we all know he had his stumbles in front of a camera and from as a communication perspective. But I think that when I talk about leaders and communication, these days a lot of things are virtual, but you're still in front of people. And I don't think a lot of people are born with this innate sense of, gosh, public speaking is something I want to get up and do today. I think that that's something that holds people back. You and I talk about limiting factors. I think this fear of public speaking. And so one of the first things, in fact, usually in the first 10 minutes of when I engage with someone as someone who's going to be coached, whether it's a group or individuals, is I tell them perfection is impossible. So you need to get that word out of your head. When we're talking about communicating and speaking in front of an audience, perfection is impossible. And I firmly believe I'm a reasonably good speaker, but if I go back and look at a recording, I will find something that I would change. Meaning maybe I missed a cue from the audience, or I said something, or that was a rare day when I had the ums in my voice, something like that.
Mhm.
But perfection is largely unachievable. And if we focus on perfection, then what happens when the inevitable mistake occurs, then we're off the rails. And then it becomes this snowball effect. And then what started out as something good is now pretty mediocre. And then mediocrity becomes pretty awful. And then what they remember was, gosh, what a terrible presentation. Not whether the message was good or valid or
Yeah,
accurate or
yeah,
anything else. And I think because so few people are innately good public speakers, we also miss the element of empathetic engagement with our audience. Because when I'm up in front of a big room, I know that 80% of the people in that audience are also happy they're not in front of being in the big room, right? They don't want to be there. And so when you make a mistake, if it happens, who cares? Let it go, because the audience often may just say, oh, he's nervous. And then you've actually created an empathetic link,
Empathetic.
which is really
Yes.
hard to manufacture. So it's I
So
think those
true.
things, and I also believe in just continuous improvement. Be better tomorrow than you were today. Be better today than you were yesterday. Very small things become huge over time.
So agreed. I'm smiling big on the inside because I'm just thinking about my own journey, right? Of this challenge with wanting things to be perfect back in the back
Hmm.
in the early stages. So when you said perfection is impossible, and that the need for a leader to really get that out of their head, because the challenge with this this perfect standard that we set up, it's always a moving goalpost, right? There'll always be something else that will make it not perfect. So
For sure.
we're
Uh,
constantly trying to achieve something that is not achievable in reality. So you had mentioned that your tagline is bridging potential to performance. So
mhm.
when you think about this idea of communication as an example, how do you help people first come to that space of the desire for having a better understanding? Let me restate that. Understanding what their potential is, and then really then a desire to go from potential to performance, like translating it from one to the
Mhm.
other. What are some of the practical ways you do that?
I think it starts with some of just the very initial conversations. If someone is coming to me or a company is coming to me and saying we want to invest time and other things in you, that alone is giving me some indication that they want to be better. And I think the desire to be better has to be part of it. I don't want to hear someone come in and say I'm awesome, let's just prove it, because that's what am I going to teach them at that point? Well, how am I going to help them? It's basically me 30 years ago, right? How are you going to break through that shell? Right?
That's
so
right.
so I don't want to coach me 30 years ago, but I think that one of the things that has always worked for me is just talking, like listening to them. How do they convey themselves? I think putting things on video is great because you can watch their body language. I
Mm,
think I'm reasonably observant and I can watch for tells. I think everyone has tells. The things that really can trip up people, like pauses and ums and repetitive
mhm,
bridging words. I can be very annoying as a coach when calling those things out. And from a very very practical perspective, one thing we have at Leadership Studio is we built a leadership assessment. So it's a very reasonably fast process to go through. You answer a bunch of questions, and then I've had to learn a lot of AI this year. So I have an AI that kind of does analysis and it spits out a report. And it's not so different from like a Myers Briggs or a DISC kind of assessment, but it's rooted in what we do. And so I know when I see this, oh, this person is a builder or a creator or whatever, that it's telling me more where they're leaning, or at least how they think they are, right? Because
mm,
when you do a self-assessment, it's not necessarily completely objective. It's how do
so
you feel
true.
when you're coming out? And what's always amazing to me is when someone takes it, in month one and they take it again in month nine, what's changed, if anything. And that's always interesting because again, nothing about the mechanism has changed. It's just how do you feel you are. And I think when you start talking about confidence and inner confidence and bringing those things out and how do we achieve that, these are become the stepping stones to moving from I don't feel like I should be here to, oh, I can do this, to, oh, I am doing this. And I think that's an amazing thing for me to see someone's confidence come out of them.
So your assessment is one of the ways that you help people to better understand the type of leader they are.
Hmm.
And it also sounds like there's an element of opportunity for them to be able to reflect on who they believe they are in that moment,
For sure. For
and
sure.
then to also compare that with where they are in ideally a more informed version of themselves as a result of having engaged in your program. Is how am I doing?
You're doing really well, and I think one of the things that always gets a raised eyebrow or perhaps an aha when I talk to individuals when we go through the assessment is we kind of highlight, here's where you probably are very strong or you feel strong, and here's maybe where you feel like you need some help or where you struggle, and getting people to say, oh, that resonates, and every once in a while saying, no, not me. There's another conversation to be had there, right? If they say no, not me, maybe it's my algorithm, who knows, but but I think that's worthy of a great conversation to understand, okay, if we picked up on this, where do you think in these 25 or 30 questions, where do you think that would have shown through? And maybe it was subconscious, right? Maybe you're scoring yourself too harshly or too strongly. But I think those are really, really great building conversations to have.
Yeah, I love that you go straight to the asking the questions of what could potentially have produced, right, a
Hmm.
result with which you disagree, because that allows people more opportunity to self-reflect and potentially helps you to break through the shell, right? If the
Hmm.
shell is still, if the shell is still existed. And I mean, as spoken by one who you mentioned, I could totally resonate with. I would not want to have coached the mid 20s to 31 version of me, my self-sufficient, independent, get her done person that I was, who believed that, I had it all together and knew everything. But just ask my husband, uh, where I'm grateful that he now says, you are not that person anymore. I'm just
Yeah.
resonating with what you were saying, right? Of that
Yeah, hopefully,
realization.
hopefully none of us are that person,
Right.
25 or 30 years ago. I want to react to one word you said because it's important because you talk about self-reflection and often when people talk to me about, oh, what's the one thing I need to be a great leader? Well, obviously there's not one thing, right? There may be one area that we want to focus on more so than others, but there's not any one thing that you can focus on. But so when I was with HPE, it was a global organization. It's a huge global company, and I had the privilege of going to a lot of places around the world and kind of giving career talks and things. And I remember distinctly being in a very big room in Romania one time when someone asked me, "Oh, what's the one skill I need to develop to advance my career?" And I said, there isn't one, but I would say if you could focus on introspection, if you could look inside and just be honest, where do I think I'm good? Where do I think I'm not good? Where do I think I stand out? And then how do we maximize, like how do we emphasize the good things, maybe de-emphasize the bad things or build them up, right? It just depends on kind of who you are and where you are in the career. But that notion of introspection or self-reflection or self-evaluation, whatever we want to call it, I think that's just hugely powerful and I think a little bit overlooked at times as a skill set to develop and continue to maintain.
What do you think causes people to not self-reflect?
Well, it could be a few things, right? Obviously, it could be the ego shell, right? I think there's a I why should I bother to look inside when everyone tells me I'm awesome? I think that when I'm objectively amazing, I don't need to do any self-reflection. But but I think what's sometimes it's fear, right? Because I I know sometimes that I feel like if I'm going to dive too deep into my own flaws, boy, that's not going to make me feel great at the end of the day if I feel like I'm just digging further and further into things I'm not amazing at. So I think some people do, they don't do it maybe out of fear or they've done it and they don't see it as a continuous exercise. Oh no, I did a deep self-evaluation or I did some sort of therapeutic exercise. I know everything in there is about me 7 years ago. But we all change, right? You just mentioned yourself. You're glad you're not that person 30 years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it has to be more of a continuous operation, a continuous evaluation. And you have to be willing. And I think that's another reason, just you have to be willing to do these things and put in the work. I for sure I know people that have been unwilling to maybe fully accept the things that they're not as good at it that they wish they were good at because they know they either don't or won't have the time to improve that aspect of them even if they admit it's a limiting factor. And I think that's tragic, right? When you see someone who has great potential, who knows they could be better, but for reasons doesn't make that investment in themselves.
It's, yes, it's true. And what's interesting, I was thinking about in your one of your opening stories when I asked you about a leader that came to mind, right, that made a
Mhm.
difference in your career. And you talked about the leader that you didn't name, but who was very specific in that you might be the youngest person, but you need to listen to these people who have greater experience, learn from them, etc. That that willingness to hear it and then to actually take action on it,
Hmm.
and to do something with it. And I think so, to your point about that, being willing, first of all, being open to receive it, but then being willing to take action on what you either see, or a question or a statement that someone makes, and how that could be a launching point into self reflection or introspection.
Yeah, I firmly believe that all feedback is good feedback, right? Because it is giving you the opportunity to realize that whether you believe it to be true or not, someone has perceived something that could be improved upon. So people talk about, oh, I don't like critical feedback, or oh, there's no such thing, right?
Mhm.
All feedback is feedback. And all feedback, I think, is good feedback. Because to be honest, if someone told me that, and again, let's just puff up my ego here for a second, and I believe I'm a pretty good speaker. If someone told me, "Oh, Chris is a great guy, but terrible speaker," obviously my initial reaction is going to be that person knows nothing or doesn't know me. Like this,
They've not seen me
but
speak.
but
They,
yeah, but to be honest, that motion, that defensive motion, that's very healthy, and I encourage the individuals I coach to go through that, let it out, right? Because if you don't go through that, oh, they're wrong thing, then it'll still be there. So you've got to let it out. You got to vent it out,
mm,
let it get it out in the world, and then say, okay, why would they have said that? Where, so in my case, let's say, where would they have heard me speak? Have they heard me speak? Maybe they saw me 20 years ago when I legitimately was not good, or maybe 15 years ago, who knows? But
right.
there, I know there was a point in my career that if there was a presentation to be given, it was choose anyone other than Thompson, right? It was anyone anyone else. And so for sure, there's examples of bad presentations or bad speeches, but I think I'm good now. And so then it's back into where would they have seen it? How can I, if this opinion matters, or it could matter to me in my development, personal, professional, whatever, how do I help them maybe change their mind? What can I do to show them examples? It doesn't have to be approve it. Maybe it's just let's just talk more. Let's engage more. Let's figure out what could be driving this difference of opinion now that I've gotten through all the defensive negatives, and see how do we reach common ground. And let's also just put a little pin out there in the world that maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. Maybe this is someone who's a really, really good speaker and an objective evaluator, and they have seen something that I should now ask them about, that I should be working to improve. Because again, perfection is unattainable. So I know I just have to be better tomorrow.
Yeah. And
Let's
that,
let's keep that in there.
well, there are a couple of things that you said that caught my attention. First, the willingness for someone to verbalize that initial negative I'm going to
Hmm.
use the term negative
Sure.
response of that's not right, right? If that sense of that's not right, that way you are able to get to a place of then more introspection to determine, okay, what might make them say that? Or to your point, you begin to ask yourself those questions, which is part of that self-reflection process, because I think there are shreds of truth to any feedback that we're
Oh,
given.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And and it's being open to find those truths in
Hmm.
that, and having that humility to recognize perfection is unattainable, and we're always going to be works in progress. You also mentioned something, you use the phrase limiting factor. That could be a limiting there. There was a part where you were saying that could be a limiting factor for
Hmm.
you in your development. What has been one of your limiting factors that you've really had to address and overcome? And I might use the phrase limiting belief as
Yeah,
well.
same.
So talk
Same.
to me
Yeah.
about that.
You know, I've talked in my lifetime a lot about imposter syndrome, and for me, this notion of why me, why have they chosen me, why am I the person speaking, why am I in this room, that those self doubts that sit out there. I've dealt with that probably at every phase of my career, and probably, I mean, to be honest, even this year with Leadership Studio, as I was building AI things, who am I to do this? This is not anything that I have a background for, and so that to me has, and I remember distinctly gosh, a very, very long time ago, long before I was even a leader at HP, and I was just an individual contributor. And this is a nuance that's unnecessary for the conversation, but we were a very large organization that doesn't sell anything, therefore they have to be funded by other parts of the organization, right? And the rest of the company was saying this doesn't make any sense. I'm not paying my fair share. And so the task was given to me, come up with a better model. Sure, I can work Excel, I can do all these things. And I just produced an idea. And my boss's boss said, yeah, let's do it. And I was like, whoa, this is a very sizable portion of budget of a very, very large company. I'm just some guy with Excel. Why have we chosen me? Why this?
Mm,
And for me, that was I think there was an inflection point for me around believing in myself and understanding that yes, I am just a person who had Excel. Yes, I am just a person who was asked, and but there was a reason they asked me. There was a reason that I was the person there. And I do believe that things happen for a reason, and we're meant to be where we are when we are, whether we feel like that's good or bad in that moment. Everything I've done in my life has led me to this point, right? So I have to accept that we are who we are and where we're meant to be when we're there. So that became something that I would think about when I would have these moments of, gosh, why me? And at every major phase of my career, every next big thing, every big leap or thing that I would do on my own, always came with that. Is this, am I the right guy? Is this the right time?
mm,
Am I doing the
mhm.
right thing? And then you get all the what ifs. What if this happens? What if this happens? And for sure, I'm a planner, right? I believe we should think about what are the logical consequences, but this is not a choose your own adventure. And by the way, side note, terribly sad thing they don't make choose your own adventure books anymore. I cannot find those anywhere, but in my youth, that was a big time waster for me. But this is not that, right? We don't have to live our lives wondering about every possible potential outcome. We should think about what are logical consequences. We should mitigate them if necessary, but also life is about taking chances and making risks and doing things that should ultimately matter to us and matter to those around us. And yeah, let's just do it, right? So by the way, there's another expression that gets used a lot with consultants, which is fake it till you make it.
Mm.
And I believe in that, but I think the problem with that is that some people don't ever hit the make it stage. And I think if you're the fake it forever, eventually that gets called out. Sometimes not as soon as maybe
It
some
should
of us would
be.
like with others. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But it does. You do eventually hit the end of that runway, and your plane is not flying.
It is so interesting that you bring up that phrase because I just recorded a video on it Sunday about about that phrase. And there is neuroscience, to show that the concept of fake it till you make it can serve people, right?
Oh, sure.
That right, like we're talking ourselves into the person that we're becoming in that sense. But I love how you just articulated that people get stuck in the faking it because they never move to the making it.
Hmm.
And the point that I was sharing on the video was that means that you can step into a room, even confidently for that matter, and recognize, and project confidence, and then realize, oh, there are some things that I need to learn. And then you go about learning them, right? You go
Yeah.
about having the conversations, having the self reflection, doing the next thing that allows you to truly anchor that confidence in something of value. And it also, isn't it interesting though? Do you believe? Okay, so this is a thought that just came to my mind. How might getting stuck and fake it, not actually making it, lead to more imposter syndrome?
Oh, yeah. Because right? That you're faking it, and unless you're a narcissist, right, that's going to come back and eventually bite you because we mentioned before the recording that the words that I've always truly valued being said about me as a leader were authentic and genuine.
Mm,
And I think most people want to be perceived as authentic. I think most people want to be authentic, want to be
yeah.
themselves, want to be seen like that. And how can you be if you have now built a falsehood on top of a lie, on top of that notion of the fake it without ever making it. You can't do it. And now, I also want to make sure that the listeners understand that sometimes that's not our fault, right? Sometimes we get into a situation and with all the right intentions, we yes, I now have this task or this role where I've convinced you, and the make it side is either there's no time for it, or it's not coming along fast enough, or
Right.
the world shifted, right? Because
Yeah.
especially in big corporations, we just wait for the next reorganization, we wait for the next thing, right? It's just right around the corner. And so something happened, but then the inevitable comes back around, and it switches. Oh no, Chris knows that. I remember hearing him speak about that 2 years ago. He must be amazing at it now. And then you're like, oh no, 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 now, now,
I'm so far out of that.
yeah, now it's really, really different. And then we have choices. We if we're caught in that situation, then we can do the emergency make it session, right? We will dive in and we will become as expert as we can in the next 36 hours.
Yeah.
Or we can say, you know what, that was a topic I learned about with the intention of growing, but we haven't gotten there yet. Or you can meet in the middle and say, wow, so many things have changed. Give me some time to reevaluate my thinking on this and take a step back. It's all about kind of what's needed in that moment. And good leaders will understand where do they need to
Agree.
fall on that spectrum. But my advice to everyone is err on the side of honesty. Always, always, always err on the side of honesty.
That is, and I appreciate you saying that because one of the things I was going to ask you is what are practical ways that you have overcome this imposter syndrome that has reared its head at different
Hmm.
seasons in your career? And I would say that's one of them, right? Your willingness to get to that place of honesty,
Hmm.
and I think oftentimes some I wonder if people equate, if I'm honest and I say to you, I don't know as much there as I would like to be able to do whatever it is before me. I wonder if that's where people they fear when I say that, does that mean I'm excluded? Does that mean I lose the opportunity? Does that mean, right? And so they assign potential outcomes that may never happen.
Sure.
And as a result, they hang out in, maybe a less than honest place or in more of that fake it space. Tell me what you
Hmm.
think about that.
I think of examples from my own lifetime, right? When you're a leader of a large organization at a big company, there are going to be times when you know things that are not available for general distribution just yet, or maybe you know of what may be coming, but you get a very pointed question. Of course, in
Mhm.
technology, right, you're always talking about when is the next layoff, right? So those questions can come, and my advice to leaders is never lie, never ever lie. And if you have to just listen, you can say that's a topic that we can't discuss yet, it's not fully formed, which is not a great answer for an audience, right? That's not going to instill confidence, but it is so much better than you saying, oh no, that's definitely not happening, when it then gets announced in the subsequent week, and now
What does
everything you
that
say from
look
that
for
point
you?
forward will be suspect. And and I also think that there are skills that leaders should develop for dealing with situations like that. I think the notion of thinking while speaking, constructing a thought that wasn't preformed, I think that's hugely valuable. And for sure, I think leaders that can stand up in front of a big group, physical or virtual, and feel like, gosh, they just had the answer to everything. There's no way they could have anticipated everything. There's no way they knew everything. But if they can create that impression, I think that's amazing. And I think the in terms of a practical exercise perspective, the things that's one of my favorite exercises to do with people is to help train their brain on how do you construct when you can't possibly know what the next thing is. And I think it's a lot of fun. And I think people I like to approach learnings from a fun angle anyway. And so kind of
Mhm.
coming at a little bit sideways gets people to engage, because no one likes role playing, let's be honest. But I think, kind of getting things from a sideways angle gets people to engage and get excited without feeling like, oh, this is a forced thing. And if they see other people doing it and see it's fun, then we can talk about why we did that, why it was important, kind of on the backside, versus leaning in with do all these things. But I think this, back to like, how do we get ourselves out? I think again, be honest. And if honesty is not possible as a leader, because sometimes that's true, then we should defer and say we can't talk about that versus
Yep.
construction in between, because the instant you crack open that door, the instant you allow someone to feel like the authenticity that you have built up, the trust they have in you has begun to wane, it takes 10 times longer to rebuild that, if ever, right? Because then it's, oh, boy, Crispin did a great job, but I don't know, that one time he clearly lied to us, so not sure I want to believe him now. And then you're fighting an uphill battle as a leader, which will make everything unsuccessful. It's not about you as a leader, the organization, the company, whatever. Nothing will ever be as good as it could be because you were willing to compromise on that level of trust that you had built up.
Yeah, that's an excellent, it's just an excellent point and a really good admonition for the leaders, really for anyone listening to this episode, that it is incredibly important that we, if we want it said of ourselves, we're authentic or genuine, that we are remembering never lie, or we can also say be honest.
Hmm.
And oftentimes being honest is the extent to which you are able to communicate honestly. And that oftentimes means, to your point, saying that is a great question and one that I'm not able to answer in fullness right now,
Hmm.
because of the nature of, whether it's, some people are on NDAs, there's all sorts of different aspects of what's
Sure.
happening, where that communication, the communication factor is part of that. I have to say, I'm intrigued. I know we don't have time to dive in, but I'm definitely intrigued on the helping, what you do to help leaders develop their thought while they're in the midst of speaking, because that is one of the things I absolutely love, just diving in on all things technical as it relates to
Hmm.
the speaking and communicating. Those are things that are really fun for me. But again, some just great practical things that you're sharing for the leaders listening. Okay, so right now in your life where you are, you started Leadership Studio. You have been building it. I saw a couple of awards on your LinkedIn. So when imposter syndrome tries to inch its way back in to your
Hmm.
mindset now, someone who is, you've got 30 years plus experience behind you, what are you saying to yourself to nip that in the bud?
I think it's a great question, and for sure, like it still happens. I think you mentioned the awards. Super proud of all those things, right? It's great to have a little bit of recognition, but those things happened because of we're leaning into technology and using AI. I'm not technical in my background. I spent a lot of time in tech, but I was not
Does it
technical in
equate
that.
to technical? Yeah.
And and so when I decided to start the leadership studio, and I did that because I felt like this was what I was meant to do. I'd certainly had a lot of people over the years saying, "Oh, you're very good at this. You should do this as a career." And I had a catalyst, and I decided this now was the time. Better than any time. I
Mm,
should try
okay.
it now. Of course, that's a huge leap. This is saturated market. There's a lot of people out there that are saying, "Oh, I can make you a better leader, or I can coach." And what do I offer that's different? And how do I bring my approach and convince others? So all those doubts, right?
Mhm.
Why me? How do I do this? How long can I do this? All those things. And then the technical side of this, right? I realized that the AI as a buzzword is everywhere, right? We cannot escape it. We cannot go a
Right.
day without it being right in front of our face at some
Yes.
point. But there were a lot of great tools that I could use, and I realized that in order to kind of tick the box on some of those other questions, like how do I get the word out? How do I convince others? I needed scale that I didn't have or couldn't afford, and so I leveraged artificial intelligence. How do I build these tools? How to, like, for the leadership assessment, like I need something to kind of understand it, score it, algorithm building, all that kind of stuff. So AI for that. I have a for people that get coached, they have an actual AI assistant, right, that teaches in our foundations, and it's pretty blunt as it talks back to you, and but they can upload presentations they've done, and it will evaluate how do they do and talk about all these things, and it's great. All those things great, but geez, every step along the way, should I be going to someone else? Am I the right guy for this? When I show it to someone else, are they going to laugh and say, "Couldn't anyone have done that?" I don't know, but I know I did it,
Right.
and I know it works. I know it works really well for the people that use it, but yeah, and there have been just in the last year. I mean, just how the AI said it, countless failures. I cannot tell you how many times I have gotten hours deep into it and realized that the AI made some mistake that I didn't catch, and now it doesn't work, and I'm like ready to throw the laptop out the window. But how do we get over this? So I've had some successes in my lifetime. I've had some successes in my career. I've had a lot of moments in my life where I felt I maybe I'm not the right person to be asking. Maybe I'm not the right person right now. And what helps me now is reflect on how did I succeed then? What and
Mm.
just also remind myself I did succeed. Right. So if sometimes people put trust in me that maybe I didn't see why they put trust in me, or maybe I just felt unworthy, but someone else did, and I was able to be successful and I was able to do these things, and so I should trust myself. I should be willing to put the trust in me that others have done along my career, and I think that's a
Mm.
very powerful statement to make to yourself, because it's a big leap, and I think we have to be willing to make those sometimes.
I appreciate the way that you just said that. How have I succeeded?
Hmm.
As well as people put trust in you, and you should also then apply that same trust to yourself in the present moment. I think that is a very powerful thing to say, and I don't know that I've had a guest say it in that way, because I would call that a confidence anchor, right? A past
Hmm.
success, and and we leverage that as a means of how we're engaging, what we're engaging in the present moment, but actually also anchoring it to how people have trusted you in the past, and you are worthy of trusting yourself when you are taking that into consideration. I think is that's super, super powerful. Man, I'm so grateful. We could have a much longer conversation, just for the record, where
Definitely.
that's concerned. Since we are bumping on time, tell people how they can learn more about the Leadership Studio, your where they go, and obviously all of these things will be in the show notes as well.
Hmm.
But
Sure.
tell us a little bit about that.
I think obviously they can go to our website, which is leadership-studio.com, and they can find a lot about what we do and how we do it. They can definitely reach out to me if they're interested in kind of gauging directly me. It's just Crispin, Crispin, Crispin at leadership-studio.com. Or if it's more general or they're seeking a quote, they can do info at leadership-studio.com. Both those ways will get to us and we can figure out how to respond. They can find me on LinkedIn, Crispin Thompson. They can find the Leadership Studio on LinkedIn as
LinkedIn,
well.
yeah.
We're happy to engage in all the ways that we're out there in the world. And there is very technically an Instagram, but it is basically dormant. So I need to build that up. So at some point
That's
they can
right.
find it. I'm happy for them to follow, but there's not a lot to see there just
Right, it's more LinkedIn as of right now, and
absolutely,
also obviously
absolutely.
your website. Well, I have really enjoyed just hearing from a standpoint of your perspective, what you bring to the conversation around leadership, and also we probably had more time around just the thinking that goes into this imposter syndrome, the fake it till you make it. I'm so glad you said that phrase,
Hmm.
and being able to dive into that a little bit more. I ask every guest, because my passion is helping people to cultivate thinking that matters. And why would you say it is important? Why do you believe it is important to cultivate thinking that matters?
I think one thing that stands out, right, is we have a finite amount of time here, right? We have a finite amount of time on this earth to do the things that should matter to us and should matter to those around us, of building up, whether it's a business, or we're supporting our family, or engaging with friends and colleagues. And so when I think about thinking that matters, I think it's we should be intentional with our moments, right? We if it's about thinking that matters, it should be about we should be thinking about the things that move us in the direction that we want to go. We should understand what the direction is. Ideally, we have that rooted in something that matters, whether that's public or private, but we should be able to take ourselves in that direction. We should there's a lot of ways to waste time in this world, right? And not that that's bad, but as much as we can, we should try to focus our energies on how do we advance ourselves, and that whether
Mm.
that's fun or it's professional or it's personal or whatever, but make the most out of our actions, make the most out of our deeds, make the most out of our thoughts, right? I think these things help center us, anchor us, pull us in the direction that we know we were meant to go. And I think that's another great thing, right? Like figure out where do you think you're meant to be and meant to go and all that, I think is powerful and important. So when you ask the question, I think it's we should do this because it should pull us in that direction, keep us in the direction we were meant to go.
I love that. You said focus our energy on how we make the most of our actions, our deeds, our thoughts, because they center and anchor us or they pull us in the direction that we should go. Crispin, so grateful to have you on the show and really diving in more so on this leadership focus. So thank you. I am going to definitively say you brought wisdom to the conversation, sir.
Excellent.
And
Excellent.
so I am grateful for that. For our audience, I want to encourage you, be sure to like, share the episode, go out and give us a review, Spotify, iTunes, all the things. You'll also find episodes on my YouTube channel as well. But we look forward to seeing you back here for the next episode of Thinking That Matters.